Good morning, sir. Good morning, classmate. I am May Villafuerte. Our topic for today is all about heritability in the broad scenes. What is heritability in the broad scenes? Heritability in the broad scenes is a basic genetics parameter for quantitative traits that may determine their selection, generation, and intensity, as well as predict their selection response and efficiency in the plant breeding. Here we define an inter-environment correlation coefficient of traits performance for test genotype between all pairs of environment to approximate broad-sense heritability. Definition of interpretation of heritability. The portion of observed variance for which difference in heritability are responsible. Moreover, there are several interpretations associated with heritability. It is equivalent to the coefficient of information of linear regression of the observable genotype value in the observed phenotype. Heritability describes how total phenotype is affected by genetic variation. Remember that a phenotype is the physical traits. Importantly, this genetic variation can be due to multiple genes and multiple alleles of this gene. In instance, we are talking about a phenotype that is multifactorial. You may remember that multifactorial described when multiple factors play a role in a trait. These factors can be both genetics and environmental. Therefore, whenever heritability of traits isn't 100% the most likely because there are some environmental factors that come into play. Rosin's heritability. From looking at the formula, you can see the, the range of heritability in from 0 to 1, or the phenotype variation contributing to heritability was 0, then there will be no heritability. This makes sense as the genotype will be no influence, and so that heritability will also be 0. You can inherit something that those that have genetic contribution. Germplasm and trait integration. Example of two different ways to partition the genetics and the non-genetics variation needed for the computation of heritability. And the next presenter is Manijin Añora.
Good morning, sir. I am Manijin P. Añora, and I will present to you some examples of broad-sense heritability in plant breeding. Phenotypic variance of quantitative trait is the sum of their genetic and environment variance. Both of these variance components can be estimated by controlling for the environment of growth or for the genetic composition of the population. If we know what part of the phenotypic variation is actual genetic variation, then we can calculate the broad sense heritability, which is simply the amount of genetic variation relative to the total phenotypic variation in the population. Broad sense heritability is a parameter that varies between 0 and 1. If its value is close to 0, then the studied trait has no heritability and all phenotypic variation you observe is due to environmental variance. On the contrary, its broad sense heritability is approaching 1, then almost all of the phenotypic variance we observe in the population is due to genetic differences between the individuals. A very important thing to remember about heritability is that this is a parameter that is measured for a population. So, a broad sense heritability for a carrot weight to 0.07 does not mean that if we look at one individual carrot, 70% of its weight will be determined by its genes and 30% by the environment growth. Does not mean what if we look at one individual carrot, 70% of its weight will be determined by its genes and 30% by the environment of growth. Heritability simply cannot tell us that. What heritability tells us is that if we look at the entire population of carrots in the field, among all the phenotypic differences we observe between individuals, about 70% of them will be due to genetic variation between individual carrots. So, heritability is not very helpful if we're interested in the precise genetic determinism of a trait's its inheritance, but it can help us make some predictions on the population level, and this is precisely the information plant breeders. Heritability of a trait of 70% means that most of the phenotypic variation in the population is heritable. And if mass selection is applied, it will result in a permanent change of the trait under artificial selection. On the other hand, if heritability is low, it means that most of the variation we observe in the population is due to microenvironmental differences between the individuals. In this case, applying mass selection to improve the trait value will have little to no effect. And instead, a more efficient way to modify the trait is to grow the plant in appropriate environmental conditions. And that's all the examples of broad sense heritability in the broad sense in plant breeding.